Yeah, so I want to talk a bit about lifecycle defense today and security strategies. Who knows the cyber kill chain? A few people. Okay, not too many. So let's go quickly into it because it's a concept that we want to use to discuss security strategies a little bit. It's actually a military term, at least the kill chain, and it explains how you eliminate a target. The first thing you do is you find it, you fix it, and you track where it's moving. Second thing is you target it by aiming, basically. Next, you engage, which means you shoot. And afterwards, you assess if any further actions have to be conducted. So that's a theoretical model about how to conduct an attack in military terms. And Lockheed Martin has come up with another term, the cyber kill chain, which basically explains the steps an attacker has to take to infiltrate your organization or whatever system they want to. First of all, they have to do the reconnaissance, find out where are your weaknesses, where are your vulnerabilities. Second step is to weaponize, choose the right exploit to infiltrate your organization based on the reconnaissance. Third step is the delivery, for example, by sending you a malicious document or a link or exploiting one of your servers remotely. Afterwards, there's the actual exploitation step, like somebody clicking and opening the document. Then they get persistent on the system that has been exploited. Persistence. And once they are persistent, that's when the real malware basically unfolds. They do command and control communication to get further instructions. From there, the instructions maybe go to other systems because this system does not have the actual data that the attacker is interested in. So you do a lateral movement within the organization, which is the extension. And afterwards, there's the stage of damage. Damage in many cases is basically exfiltrating the data. But you can also think about sabotage, like in the case of Sony, where all the files got deleted, or in case of Stuxnet, where basically uranium wasn't enriched the way it should have been. Okay, so this is the CXO track. Do we actually have any CISOs in the room? Anybody who has a title like CISO or a similar responsibility? Everybody's afraid to say I am. All right. Actually, it's quite hard to be a CISO. You have a lot of things that you can decide, like, for example, which security strategy to choose, and we will talk about a few today. And you can also manage the implementation. But the biggest problem you have as the CISO is you have to basically beg for money with which you are normally not providing any added value to an organization. But basically, you only burn money for the sake of not having opportunistic cost of an incident. So you manage IT risk, basically. And here's a simplified formula for how you're trying to do this. You have the probability for a breach, and if you have a breach, you have a specific cost. And if you multiply this, you have the expected loss. Okay? And the amount of budget that you get basically is like an insurance premium that you have to set in relation to the expected loss. So if your budget is significantly lower than the expected loss, you are basically making money if you don't have an incident, but you are living on a higher risk. I said in the beginning of the slide, it's hard to be a CISO. The hardest place to be a CISO is actually insurance companies. Because at insurance companies, everybody has understood this term. They make all their money with this. And so they usually like to underinvest because they know with this they can actually gain some money. They like to take the risk. Okay, so much for the basics. One other basic that we need to keep in mind is the risk and cost is actually increasing the further you get in this cyber kill chain. So if you can prevent something early, then the cost is not too big. But if a big breach has happened, we're at the point of damage where documents are exfiltrated, it's hard to get rid of the threat. And also the cost for your organization is usually very high. So the whole thing as a CISO is about minimizing loss, the expected loss, with the budget that you have available or that you need to agree on. That's a lot of negotiations. So choosing the right security strategy is key in that scenario. And we're going to talk about the traditional security strategy, defense in depth, prevention and detection that Anton has also started to mention yesterday. We will actually go one step further and look into continuous response and lifecycle defense, and maybe even talk a bit about offensive security. So let's start with traditional security or traditional defense, and that's what everybody has preached for a long time. You need, in order to secure your organization, you need firewalls, you need patches, and you need antivirus, right? So think about your daily business, how you operate. Who's patching regularly? Who's patching in time? A very honest audience. Nobody's patching. There's just too much pain involved in patching. And even if you, for example, patch all Windows systems right away, what about Adobe? What about Java? What about Silverlight? What about all those components that are add-ons to normal systems? Are they all patched right away? Not necessarily, not in real time usually, because you can also break things if you patch too much. What about firewalls? Well, reconnaissance nowadays is not happening by running Nmap anymore. Reconnaissance, finding out about the target, is happening on Facebook nowadays and social media. How can I basically target one specific person that I want to attack? And also the delivery is not blocked by firewalls anymore nowadays. Nowadays we get exploits via spear phishing emails or drive-by exploits or things like this, water hole attacks. So the nice thing about these three components is they are usually very cheap. Often patches are, you get them for free, antivirus is low cost, and firewalls, also everybody has them. So the budget is very low. The problem is the probability for a breach is very high. So this is something for risk lovers. Unfortunately, the companies that are running these models are often not risk-loving companies, but more conservative. Here's one more point about antivirus that a lot of people forget. Once malware is running on a system, you can basically forget antivirus. Here's a tool, RDG Tjon. You can find it in all kinds of underground forums. And basically in this tool, you can select your malware, you pack it, and you select which antivirus you want to bypass. Here's Avast, Windows Defender, GData, Komodo, the Windows Firewall, Norton. You just choose whatever you want to evade, and basically it's not running on the system. Okay? And afterwards it's disabled, not a problem. Okay, so in this case you're investing in it. So what do you do when you're under-investing? Well, you just throw more money at the problem, right? So the next step in evolution of security strategies that we saw is defense in depth, a buzzword that you've probably all heard. And it's best explained with some pictures from the medieval times. Anton already mentioned yesterday, it's kind of IT security medieval times. The idea is to add just more security layers that an attacker has to overcome in order to get to the treasure. You know, like this picture of a castle in Wales. First of all, you have a large pond that you have to swim through in order to get to the treasure. Then you have an outer ring of walls that you have to overcome, and if you have overcome that, there's an inner ring of walls, and then there are towers and buildings and so on. So basically, there are lots of hurdles that the attacker has to overcome, and you're trying to make it as hard for them as possible to get into your organization. So this is how it looks like when you throw enough money at the problem. You have firewalls. In addition, you have IPS, next generation firewalls, mail gateways, network AV. You still need to patch, by the way. Don't forget that. But instead of running just one antivirus, you're running two antiviruses on the system, and you enable the HIPS functionality, like host intrusion prevention functionality. Okay, so lots of money thrown at the problem. As you can see, the whole thing is focused on preventing attacks. It's all the stages before something gets persistent on the system. You're not doing anything about the last two stages, about the C2 communication, about the extension, so lateral movement, and if something has been really breached, you don't control the damage. So actually you have no control over what is actually costing most and has the highest risk for your organization. This is where this security strategy is running short. So what makes up a good Chief Information Security Officer? And if you have a geek background, like I have, usually you try to tend to think about how can we minimize the probability for somebody to breach us. Think about protection. How can we get this as low as possible? And you try to come up and find solutions how to do this technically, how to prevent somebody from getting in your organization. And you are willing to invest lots of resources, lots of budget on actually achieving this. The problem is, if you want to lower this probability, let's say from 1% to 0.5%, you have to invest quite a lot, and you will never be able to get to a probability of 0. There's always a chance that you will be breached. A more wide-looking CISO actually controls and puts focus on controlling the cost as well, in addition to the probability of being breached. It's key to think about reaction time in case you are breached, because sooner or later you will be breached. We have seen this with all larger organizations. They have incidents sooner or later. So reaction time in case when you have an incident is one thing, and reaction quality is important. I've never heard of a CISO who got fired because their organization was breached, but we've definitely heard about CISOs that got fired because the quality of their response after a breach was very bad, or they took months to respond to an incident. So how do we control the cost actually of a breach? And there we have to think about what actually happens when you get breached. And here are also some examples of good reactions. First of all, stolen data. That's the first thing you think about. Okay, we got breached. What kind of data got stolen? One of the things that's usually valuable for organizations is sales data or revenue information, customer data. Who are the customers? So think about if this was stolen from your organization. What would happen? What would happen if all your customers basically went to the competitors, or let's say all the data about your customers went to the competitor? Maybe you lose half of your revenue. Does that bankrupt your current organization, or would you actually be able to recover from it? Think about these scenarios yourselves, like where is your value in the company when it comes to data? Maybe the source code or intellectual property. And some organizations think we have to so protect our source code because that's the key element of our organization when you're in software development. Actually, in many cases, it's not that bad if your source code gets leaked, except for security reasons maybe. But if you have good source code, you still have the copyright. And if you have patents, for example, on your intellectual property, it doesn't matter that much if it's stolen because it's public anyways, and you have it protected. Customer data is another thing. In your organization, you might think, what about PCI compliance? What about all the credit card data that we have in the organization got leaked? That would probably ruin our organization, right? It's also reputation there. Yeah. It's the data, the stolen data leads to bad reputation. There was a large breach when it comes to credit card and debit card data last year, September. Do you guys remember Home Depot? Yeah? Does anybody remember how many credit card and payment card details got stolen? 60 million? Yeah, 56 million cards, data of cards got stolen. So do you think this has had a big impact on Home Depot? Here's the stock curve. September 2014, somewhere around here, is where the breach happened. You can see it had almost no impact on the stock at all. And why is that? Because the CISO, or the security team in total, did a very good job. Once the breach was announced, they already had prepared documents with all kinds of information for the people that were affected, and they gave free credit card monitoring to everybody who was affected. So they handled the whole case very well, and they basically got away with just some bad press, but no financial loss when it came to the stock. Quite interesting. Reputation is another thing. You already mentioned that customer data can have a bad reputation. Another thing is if your emails end up on the front page of New York Times or on WikiLeaks or somewhere else, like it was, for example, for HB Gary. For HB Gary, it actually had quite a big impact, but it may not necessarily mean that your whole organization goes down. Actually, in HB Gary, they just fired the CEO and were acquired 1 year later by Mantech. So also they survived. So not every breach necessarily means that your organization goes down. So how can you actually control the cost? Controlling the cost is having right plans for when something happens. But it's also about detecting things. And Anton mentioned this in his presentation yesterday briefly. Don't just invent in prevention technology. You should still try to prevent what you can prevent, which are usually known threats. There are signatures out there. So if you ever hear somebody saying antivirus is dead, don't believe them. Antivirus is not dead. Antivirus is still necessary so that you don't have to deal with all the mass crap that's out there that you're not interested in dealing with. But in addition, you also need to have some tools for detecting unknown threats. And very often these tools don't work in real time, like sandboxes, for example. There are some sandboxes that take up to 1.5 hours to detect unknown threats. Others take only a few minutes, but it's still not real time. It still has a bit of delay. Or maybe there are network signatures that you cannot apply right when the threat comes in, but maybe 2 days later. So this still allows the attacker to get inside your organization for a specific amount of time, but let's think Stuxnet in this case. Key elements there are to add data collection points in the cyber kill chain, like for example sandboxing, logging and correlation tools, network forensics and so on, data exfiltration prevention. So now this probably sounds like a sales pitch, right? Because if the problem gets worse, you cannot solve it, just throw more money at it. No, that's not necessary. Here's the situation that we often see when we run proof of concepts at customers, and actually this is real numbers from a real proof of concept. Organization about 5,000 employees, and we were just running some tools, some detection tools for a week. If you look at the data over here, we had almost 900 outgoing connections to malicious sites, and we had several malware caught within less than a week. Specifically interesting, these 4 ones that were not detected by any type of AV at all. And that's the situation that is seen very often when we introduce detection tools at organizations. And then what happens? Then you need to start running incident response processes, okay? So you investigate what data and systems were affected, when did it happen, is it over now, or is it a persistent attack, and so on. You ask all of the questions. You do this for the first malware and first infected system. You go back to start, do this for the next infected system, and so on. You always do something and go back to start. But everything stays very static. And it stays at the cost level that you have set at the very beginning. So another approach is actually to be more agile, to actually include the things that you've learned during your response to form your security strategy and to form and choose the tools that you actually want to use. So the idea is you want to learn from the past to control both. You want to control the probability for a breach, and you want to control the you want to control the cost in case of an incident. And since every organization has incidents and there are breaches in every organization can learn. And if you haven't found any incidents in your organization yet, I promise you just don't have the right tools yet. Promise. So you improve along the way, and if you find something in your enterprise, you can also use this, if you do a root cause analysis, to find out where is your weakness, where's your strongest weakness at the moment, and where should I invest actually? Where can I spend the minimum amount of budget to maximize the return on investment, which is reaction time and reaction quality. You gain experience, and you don't need to buy the whole portfolio of security tools, you can start where you are right away. In general, the whole model looks like this. First of all, you start to fortify as much as you can think about things. Probably everybody's running a firewall nowadays. Think of patches. You also need prevention technology, like for example antivirus, but you will still be breached. So you also want to have some detection technologies, like CMs that correlate the logs and where you can drill down on details. Sandboxes, data exfiltration prevention, detection tools that help you to identify that a breach has happened. Once you have identified that you had a breach, you also need to find the root cause, and that's where you need tools to respond, either network forensic tools or host forensics or both. And actually network forensics is very important in this point, because very often you get an attack, but you have no idea how it got into your network, how it got into your organization. If you have network forensic tools that record what's going on in your organization, you can at least go back and find out what happened. Normally all network packets are gone once they are sent and received. If you have those tools, you can use the knowledge again to fortify, to make your system stronger again. So Lance, for example, this morning was talking about securing the human. So if you find out that it was actually the human aspect, social engineering, how somebody got into your enterprise, you want to invest in awareness campaigns. Maybe you find out that your antivirus didn't catch a known threat even 5 days after it was known. Then maybe it's time to replace your antivirus engine. Or maybe you find out an IDS would have caught this attack. Well, then you gotta invest in that. So it's not about buying everything that's out there, because that's just burning money. It's investing in where you can identify your organization has the largest shortages. And for that, you need to know what is happening actually on your premises. Okay, so how do you start this? How do you get started on continuous response and lifecycle defense? You can basically start where you are and just add some forensics or e-discovery tools so that you can do root cause analysis. The nice thing about it is the security personnel that you already have basically also learns and improves on the way. You give them time to work on incidents, to identify what's going on, and they themselves can come up with new suggestions, and they see where the shoe is actually pressing most. There's a limitation, and that's probably something that most of you have already learned the hard way or not the hard way. There is not that many people out there that have the right skill set. Security people are not out there in masses. So you need to have a minimum skill set, but the nice thing is, even if you have somebody who's, for example, junior, they also grow and become more senior as they go and as they work on more incidents. And, well, you don't need to have people idling around, because there are always incidents. So they are 100% used. Let me just see some hands. Who has a CERT team or something similar in their organization? Maybe a quarter. So as you can see, a lot of teams don't really have dedicated security personnel. You can also outsource and still do continuous response and lifecycle defense by, for example, using an MSSP, a managed security service provider. And the nice thing there is they are working with different clients, and they not only learn from one organization, they learn from multiple organizations. The downside is, obviously, the money you spend is spent on this organization as they get better and better, and you are not guaranteed that actually they are investing in what gives most gain for your organization. Okay, I also promised that we have a quick look into offensive security. There's not much time left, but we will have a quick excursion, because that's also an interesting field, and that's where Anton and I left the discussion yesterday. Offensive security means you don't just sit there and wait for attacks to happen, but you basically try to make it a bit more proactive how you approach security. There are several things that you can do, and one is turning the asymmetry around. Who has heard about the defender's dilemma before? One. It's basically the scheme that as a defender, you have to make sure that you secure all accesses into your organization. Social engineering, firewalls, spear phishing gateways, or mail gateways, and so on. You have to secure everything. If you forget one single way into your organization, you can be breached. Well, that's the whole concept of the risk management here. So you can turn this around, and you can actually put down traps for the attacker by pretending they are open doors. Honeypots is one thing, but you can also lay down tripwires because you know more about your organization than the attacker. So when an attacker, for example, starts to go lateral in your organization, try to access other hosts, you can identify this. Or if you run sandboxes, for example, you can put down something like honey tokens or information that can give you an idea that an attacker would do harm to your organization. Let me give you a concrete example. Sony. One morning, the Sony employees came to work, everybody switched on their monitors, only to find out that all the hard disks have been wiped. All of them. And the only thing that was left was a browser window with a laughing clown. You've probably seen these pictures, right? The laughing clown. That's a pretty scary scenario. Think about it yourself. You come into your organization and all computers are completely clean of data. All your documents are gone. Everything is gone. And how they did it was they had hard-coded admin usernames and passwords and IP addresses that they wanted to use for the lateral movement. If Sony only had put in some rules in firewalls and ran these executables as they had passed through the network, they could have identified in the sandbox that there's access to other corporate resources, important resources, like, for example, important strategy documents that are deleted afterwards. And if you have the right rules, you can identify that this is happening up front and proactively handle this as a threat. Let's go one step further. You can also plant landmines instead of tripwires. For example, you can put out documents that look very promising, that have exploits in them, and they call home. So if, for example, an attacker takes a document that says financial data 2014 and opens it, you put it in a location where normally no user can find it, but if an attacker finds it, they send it home, they open it, and get exploited themselves, sending beacons back to you. I'm just trying to create some inspiration here. Talk to your lawyer before you do that. This is nothing that is necessary common practice, but it's possibilities. Things that are actually happening, but they are not very often talked about, is hackback, or something that I call the man in black. That is basically hacking into your opponent's sites up front to see what actions they plan. This is happening a lot around the banking Trojans and payment card industry, because they want to see what kind of data gets dropped and where did the data get dropped from. So if you just have access to that data, you can find out what kind of campaigns are planned. The banks want to see what kind of campaigns are running against us and so on. And this way they get a lot of proactive information about the adversary. And we've even seen organizations that provide services to remove your data from these drop zones, from these databases. So for example, if you operate as a security person in a bank and you don't want your bank to get a bad reputation because they are breached so often, well, you can just hire some men in black that go into these databases, delete all entries related to your organization. And then no security researcher that may accidentally look at this can identify that you've been breached or your customers have been breached. Okay, so we talked a lot about different security strategies, and which model you choose depends a bit on your budget and also on the security personnel that you have available. But in general, there are some things that you need, you should take away. One is you will be breached. If you haven't been breached, you will be breached, or you're not seeing it yet. With the right security strategy, you can adjust your budget and the expected loss that you have. And nowadays, just buying prevention is not enough. Just stating again what Anton has already said yesterday. Prevention technology by itself is not sufficient, because you will then not be able to see what's really happening in your organization, and the cost will increase significantly afterwards. And a nice way to actually get to a better security strategy is to learn from the past and improve along the way. Some pretty big words. So now I'm open to actually get some questions and say, this is all bullshit, like you've learned from Kai earlier today.
There are plenty of examples where attackers knows the network better than the defenders. How does that one sound?
Yes, they don't start off that way, though. But definitely there are cases where the attacker knows more about the network after they have infiltrated the organization. They also know better what the passwords of your users are, and lots of stuff. But initially they know less, so you can use that asymmetry against them.
In regards to forensics, do you find that organizations are normally, that they have good forensic readiness, like the ability to actually log and deliver evidence which has good integrity to law enforcement in order to get their cases solved?
So the question was whether organizations already have enough readiness when it comes to forensics. The question is actually twofold. You asked about being ready to respond to law enforcement, and that's a different story than doing continuous response. For law enforcement, you got to follow strict procedures, and that also is about educating users about proper forensic procedures. You need to have training on this. You cannot learn this on the way. But you can learn on the way how to do normal forensic, IT related, and how you learn from that yourself, how you learn for your organization about it. We find that actually most organizations don't have the right tools for that yet. Like when network data is gone, it's gone. You are a little more lucky when you have an incident that you can also see on a host, because on a host usually there is some persistence either in memory or on the hard disk or somewhere else where you can do offline forensics afterwards. So that is usually the case. People can react better there, but network forensics is a very, very neglected area. Okay, thank you very much.